This is Mark Johnson from Loyalty 360. I'm at the 2012 Forrester Customer Experience Summit. I'm sitting with Larry Freed from ForeSee Results. Larry, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Mark.
Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little about your company?
Sure. My name is Larry Freed. I'm the CEO of ForeSee, and we measure the customer experience through the lens of customer satisfaction, using a proven methodology to help companies understand how successful each of the consumer touchpoints they have are, where to focus their efforts to improve, and provide benchmarks.
Great. What will be the biggest challenge for marketers in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the biggest challenge is really going to be about the enormous amount of data that's coming available to them as the number of channels and devices that consumers use proliferate. So no longer do we have one PC that we use to access the internet and to interact with companies, but now it's about our laptop computer at work, our home computer, and we might have 3 or 4 of those, and then we have our gaming devices connected, and we've got our phones and our tablets. And with that, there's a lot of marketing data that's gathered and making sense of that. And the biggest challenge is that most consumers are multi-channel and multi-device consumers. And what happens is most of our metrics are very siloed. So we've got to break out of that paradigm and really start to look across the experience the consumer has. The consumer doesn't care what channel or device they're on. They care about the experience.
As a kind of follow-up question to that, Tim Sooth today at Axiom talked about the 2 petabytes of data that have been created over the last year. And as you mentioned, brands struggle excessively with getting actionable insight from these different touch points, because organizations who may have run direct mail, who may have run customer experience, who may have the mobile, who may have the internet, they're different entities. How do you change a culture within an organization that may have been more directed or top-down, a push-based mentality, to get them to see that these varied entities have insight that they need to kind of collect and analyze?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's a big challenge for organizations to change and adapt to this. I heard big data described in a way the other day that was volume. It was about volume, it was about variety, and it was about velocity. And that sort of is a good way to think about all of this data that we have. And it's not about how much data we have, it's about understanding and having the right data. And so in many cases, it's not about having more data, larger terabytes of data that you have about the same experience and the same users. It's about being able to make sense of it. And I think to a great extent, marketers are going to have to step back and look at some of the metrics they have and realize that they're no longer relevant. Things like conversion rate on a website. 40% of the people that visit a website during the holiday season come to buy. 50% come to do research, and 10% come to do other things, check on order and status and so on. So what does a conversion rate metric across that 100% really tell you? Not much, right? So there's a lot of metrics that actually can be misleading when they're only within that silo. User comes to a website, has a great experience, looks at something, puts it in their cart, abandons the cart and goes in the store and buys. That's a good experience. But our traditional siloed metrics we look at it and say it was a failure. So marketers have to start looking at this in a new way through the eyes of the consumer, is the way we think about it.
Absolutely. Experience drives engagement, and engagement drives loyalty. Yet at every part of the channel, people have to feel engaged. What are the challenges you see with multi-channel communication for today's marketers, and how does your product address this opportunity?
So what we do is we're all about the measurement of those interactions, measuring the engagement they're having. I've seen a lot of different ways that people try to get at engagement, and some are good, some are clever, and some aren't so good. It's not about how much interaction they have with you. It's about, is it a positive interaction or a negative interaction? I saw one person describe how they measured engagement. It was about the number of emails and the number of phone calls they made and the number of times they posted something about the company. And it was nothing about the positive or the negative. So if a consumer is going to say, boy, this retailer really sucks, I don't look at that as good engagement. I look at that as bad engagement. So I think to a great extent, what we focus is helping them understand the positive nature of that experience. And engagement isn't necessarily about the frequency. It's really about how loyal you are to it. And I think engagement and loyalty, there's some correlations, but there's not always causation. I can have a great experience and be very, very loyal to somebody that I only go to 3 times a year. Right? It depends on the product, it depends on the service, it depends on what I want out of that relationship.
Absolutely. The cauldron call for today's marketing strategists and engagement, I think we talked about this, define engagement and how your product can drive audience engagement. I think kind of an add-on to that as well is engagement is multifaceted. How do you kind of define it for a brand that they can measure, but also kind of change from that paradigm of top-down autocratic marketing versus a more reciprocity-based marketing communication?
Yeah, I think we actually aren't going to help them directly improve that engagement. What we're going to do is help them measure it so they can make the improvements and help them diagnose it. So when consumers are engaged, is it a good experience, is it a bad experience, and what can we do to make it a better experience, to make them want to come back more, to make them want to tell their friends, to make them post things on Facebook and Twitter and so on. And so it's really about getting the intelligence of the consumers, understanding what's working, what's not, and what they need to improve that experience. And then you can take those actions. So we see a lot of things that are trial and error these days, right? We just keep throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. I'm not sure that's the best strategy, right? You have to test things, but you want to be thoughtful about your tests and make sure that you're lining up your actions with those things that you're confident are going to actually improve the experience, and that's going to improve the engagement, and that's going to improve the loyalty.
Excellent. Give us a high-level overview of your product and how it helps drive more effective engagement and therefore bettering marketing outcomes for the brand.
So we're going to measure every step of that customer experience, from visiting a website to visiting a mobile-optimized website to going into an app to calling a call center to going into a store, whatever the case may be, and even the total relationship you have. And by measuring each of those touch points, using customer satisfaction as the key part of it, we're able to understand how successful that experience was from the customer's perspective, which most of the metrics we have today that we use are from the organization's perspective. What your conversion rate was, what your turnover is, what your average order size is, and all those kinds of things. We want to look at it. Those don't go away. Those are good. They're never going away. And that's really measuring success from an organization's perspective. We add to that measuring success from the consumer's perspective through their eyes.
Right.
So with that information, you're able to measure success. You're able to gain intelligence on what's important to the customers, and you're able to identify those areas to invest in, to allocate your resources that will drive the right kind of behavior. And that allocation of resources to the right things is probably the most important step for a business, because those companies that allocate their resources in the right places, they win.
Right.
They beat us. And then finally, benchmarks. And so our product's all around making our companies that we work with smarter about their customers so they can make the right investments and see how they're doing against their peers.
Great. Why do brands struggle with listening to their customers? All effective marketing strategies should be based on an interactive dialogue. How can one do so with little, if any, customer listening?
It's tough if you're not listening to your customers. There's nothing, the most important asset any company has. It's not their technology, it's not their brand, it's not their locations, it's their customers. So we have to listen to our customers. But then there's two kinds of listening. There's what we would call feedback, and then there's measurement of the voice of customer. And feedback's a good thing. When people tell you something's wrong, you should listen, right? It has a tendency to be very biased, where you have those on the very high end of the spectrum that are very, very dissatisfied. They reach out and they'll find you, right? Whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or on Yelp or wherever it is, or whether it's through a link on your website or an email to your CEO. And then you get a few that are very happy, and you get the silent majority of your customers are often ignored with feedback mechanisms. But feedback's okay, so it's not a bad thing. But what you really need is you need that measurement aspect. You need to be able to measure that experience so that you understand whether it's working or not. And you need to get that full spectrum of your customers across the breadth of their levels of satisfaction. Now you've got something that's really, really powerful, and it's taking the science and the technology and applying it to that listening of the voice of your customer. I see people making mistakes as, I'll look out on Twitter and see what my customers are saying. That's feedback. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. We want to see it, and we want it to be positive. But it's not necessarily representing the mass of our customer base. When we make our business decisions and allocate our resources, we don't want to do it to the squeakiest wheel. We want to do it to the group of customers that are going to make the biggest impact on our bottom line.
Great. Well, Larry, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Mark.